Is the thing. The date is April 7th, 1998. The survivor is Henry Wieselberg, Wieselberg. The interviewer is Andrew Hartman, Hartmann. The city is Boca Raton, Florida. In the USA, the language is English. This is tape 1. My name is Andrew Hartman, Hartmann. Today's date is April 7th, 1998. I am conducting an interview with Mr. Henry Wieselberg, Wieselberg. We're in Boca Raton, Florida. Please tell us your name.
What's it?
Tell me your name, please.
My name is Henry Wieselberg.
And please spell it.
Wieselberg.
And what was your name at birth?
My name was Heinz Wieselberg. Heinz. Wieselberg. Same thing.
Did you ever have any other names?
No.
And please tell us your date of birth and how old you are now.
My date of birth was April 4th, 1921. And last Saturday I was 77 years old.
And where were you born?
I was born in Vienna, Austria.
Could you please tell us your parents' names, your father first?
My father's name was Elkan. My mother's name was Paula.
And did you have any brothers or sisters?
I have one sister. Her name is Leanne, who is 2 years younger than I am.
Do you remember where you lived in Vienna?
Absolutely. We all lived in Vienna in Josefstädter Straße 51 im 8. Bezirk.
Which means in English?
Which means it's the 8th district, and the name of the street is Josefstädter Straße 51. The apartment number was 54.
What were your parents' occupations?
My father had a fur business in the same building. My mother was a homemaker, and she also helped my father in the store.
Tell us about your school, for example.
Originally, I started in elementary school. Then I went to middle school, and then I had high school, and then I had 2 years of college until Hitler came in 1938, and we had to stop going to school.
Did your father have any military service?
No, my father was an invalid. He had a shorter leg, and they did not take him into service.
Can you describe your religious observance?
Religious?
Yes, in your family.
Yeah. We had a seat in a synagogue which was in the neighborhood. The name was Neudecker Temple in the Neudecker Straße. We had a permanent seat there, and I attended Hebrew school and the high holidays there.
Which form of Judaism did you practice?
We were conservative.
Can you describe a typical way that you celebrated holidays in your home?
Very simple. We celebrated the holidays the same way we do here. We used to go to synagogue Friday night. Saturday morning I had to go for youth services. And then we celebrated all the major holidays.
Can you describe, if you remember, a typical scene at a Seder table?
Yes. Vaguely, I remember the Seder table that the way we have it here. First we went to synagogue, and then we went ahead, and my mother prepared a very nice Seder table. and we kept eating matzahs for 7 days, 8 days.
Did the Seder table include anyone other than your immediate family?
Yes, usually we used to have some relatives come over and they joined the Passover with us.
How did you spend your typical Saturday?
My typical Saturday in the morning we had to go for youth services, which was part of our Jewish upbringing. And then in the afternoon we used to go for a walk or visit relatives and stuff like that.
What did your family do for recreation as a family?
Okay. My mother, my sister, and myself, we used to rent a villa in the country where we went for 8 weeks, most of the time in Carinthia, which is southern Austria in the Lake District. And my father used to take 2 weeks by himself in order to go to the mountains because the fur business at that time was not as regulated as we are today, and he needed that fresh mountain air in order to clear his lungs and stuff like that.
What do you remember that you like to do in your spare time?
My spare time, I was an avid sportsman. I loved to ride bicycles. I used to go on bicycle tours. I used to go skiing. I used to go ice skating, swimming, horseback riding, and that was it.
Let's talk a little bit about your school. What was your school like, your earliest recollection? That's if you remember elementary school. In terms of
elementary school, the boys were separated from the girls, and in Europe we had the same teacher for 4 years. So she went up with you every time you passed the grade and went to the next grade. And the same thing was in public school, and college also was segregated.
Do you remember the approximate composition of Jews versus others?
Yes, the Jews were minimal. If we were 2 or 3%, we were a lot. That's it.
Do you remember any of your teachers' names?
Yes. My public school teacher, I remember her name was Fräulein Stangelberger. And she was a wonderful teacher, and she made a great impression on me and helped me with her teaching throughout my life. And I was still friendly with her until 1992, when she died at the age of 94. And I was in contact with her most of the years except the war years, and in 1977 I visited her in Vienna, and in 1987 I took my family to Europe, and I also visited her in her apartment with my children, and they were amazed of what wonderful person she was. May her soul rest in peace. She was a Gentile.
How did the few Jews that were in school get along with the Gentiles?
To be honest with you, at that time I didn't know of any anti-Semitism. Unfortunately, on the day of the Anschluss, which was March 13, 1938, none of my friends, Gentile friends, would want to talk to me, and they all became Hitler advocates, and it was a scene which I've never believed in my life.
I'd like to talk more about that, but before we do, when did you first experience, or did you experience any anti-Semitism prior to the Anschluss?
I did not, because I never had a problem where I could say somebody didn't like me or something. I mean, you picked your own friends, and the friends, whether they were Gentile or Jewish, they were friends. But the minute there was the Anschluss, this thing changed completely around.
Tell me about your close friends outside of school. Did you have Jewish as well as Gentile
I had
friends?
both. Yes, I did have both. I had a lot of Gentile friends who I used to go camping with. We went on hiking trips. We went on bicycle trips. And we got along very well.
Do you recall, as I asked before, any incidents at all of anti-Semitism prior
Not
to the
at the
Anschluss?
beginning. I guess I was too young, maybe, to realize it. In business, there might have been anti-Semitism. But as far as a young fellow with 14, 15, 16, I did not recall it.
Forgot to ask you earlier, what language did you speak at home?
We spoke German.
Was Yiddish spoken at all?
No, because my mother didn't speak Yiddish, and I don't even remember if my father spoke. The only thing is, if my parents wanted to talk without the children hearing, they spoke Czechoslovakian, because my mother was born in Prague.
And
My
your
father came from Poland, but it's a language which is similar Czechoslovakian to Poland, to Polish.
Back to your family, do you know where your grandparents came from?
Yes. On the maternal side, my grandfather was a rabbi in Czechoslovakia, in Lytton.
What was his name?
His name was Gans, Gans. He was a rabbi and a reformed rabbi, I'd say.
And your father's
My
grandparents?
father's, I never got any information about my father's parents. The only thing I remember was that my father's father lost his wife and married another woman with some children. And between the two mothers, they had about 11 children.
What was your mother's maiden name?
My mother's name was Paula Gans. She came from Prague, and she had a family of 5. There was a family of 5 sisters and 2 brothers. And she was in the hat business. She was learning to be a hat maker. When my father met her and took her to Vienna, and they got married there in 1918 in Vienna.
Before we go to the Anschluss that you mentioned earlier, is there anything else during the prior period before the Anschluss? Anything else of
Well, the
importance?
only thing I can tell you is my father was very comfortable. He afforded us most of the luxuries which children have. We used to go for 8 weeks into the country every summer. My mother took us ice skating. My mother took us to the State's Opera House. We went to see plays, and we led a very contented life.
Now we can talk about the Anschluss that you mentioned before. Please describe it in detail.
In the morning of March 13, 1938, German troops marched into Vienna. People lined the streets with flowers, and everything was Heil Hitler. And from that time on, somehow automatically, anti-Semitism came out of the shadows, and it showed itself right then and there. Later on, edicts came out that the Jews could not go into parks, the Jews cannot go into movies, the Jews cannot go into certain places, and we were ostracized.
How old were you on that day in 1938?
17.
Do you recall conversations at home
Yes.
among your parents? Please describe.
My father was a good Austrian, so to speak, and he said to us, Hitler will never bother Austria, and besides certain little things, life should go on as usual. But later on, he realized that he was wrong.
Most of us remember where we were on a particular day of importance in our lives. Do you remember where you were?
Yeah,
on that
absolutely.
day?
I was home.
Home?
I was home. Yes, I looked out the window. Our apartment faced the main street, and I see the tanks and the squad cars roll in, and people adore them.
What were your thoughts?
It was bewilderment because I've never been exposed to such a situation.
Do you remember any music playing?
They had bands marching and playing National Socialist songs, like the Horst Wessel song and others. And being that Austria and Germany lost World War I, they thought this is going to be a retribution and a victory for making that Anschluss without the League of Nations permission.
What happened after that? What happened in
Well,
the evening after the Anschluss, the day of the Anschluss?
Nothing particular happened the same day, but as days go by, new edicts came out, what you could do, what you could not do. Later on, we had to wear a Star of David to show that we are Jews. You couldn't go, like I say, you couldn't go to public places, you couldn't go into a movie, you couldn't go into a theater.
Could you describe the Star of David?
The Star of David was a yellow star on a blue or black background, which was pinned on the left side of your coat.
What would happen if someone did not wear the yellow star?
Well, they would arrest you, they beat you up, or stuff like that. Jews were open for Jews was open season, and anybody wanted to hit you could hit you, and nobody would have to go to jail for that.
Did you witness any beatings?
There was beatings
arrests?
there was roughing up, you know what I mean, there's spitting and stuff like that.
What happened with your father's business?
A month later, a commissar came in, which the Hitler Party put in there. He also was a furrier, was a Gentile, he was a furrier. He had a small little business in the next district, and he came in, and the first thing he did is he took over the bank books, he took over the checkbooks. And then every day he told my father he's taking a coat or a jacket home, he has a customer in his place, but he never brought it back. Within 3 months' time, he liquidated the whole business, including all the assets, and we didn't have recourse to complain or do anything. And he got away with it with murder.
What transpired in your life in school, for example?
In school, you couldn't go to school no more. You had to stay out of school because your life was in danger. So what you tried to do is you tried to stay home or go inconspicuous. If you wanted to take a walk or someplace, you wouldn't go to a park no more. And it was very hard to visit relatives. You didn't want to ride the subways no more. And they had the authority to come to your house at 10, 11, 12 o'clock at night, knock on the door, arrest you, and send you away to a concentration camp.
Was your home ever subject to any searches?
No, we were lucky that we had nice neighbors. So when, let's say, the SS or the SR used to come and ask where the Jews lived, they didn't give our name. So in this respect, we were not touched.
Was your sister younger or older than you?
She's 2 years younger. She was 15 at the time.
What happened in her life in school?
Same thing. She could not go back to school, and she had to be careful where she went or with whom she was seen, talking or whatever.
What was the food situation like during that period?
The food situation, you could buy food. You could buy food. I don't know to what extent, because I was not familiar with the shopping as far as a house goes, but I don't think I ever went hungry.
I meant to ask you earlier, did you belong to any organizations or youth groups?
Yes, I belonged to the Boy Scouts of Austria.
What happened with that membership?
I did not go back.
In the Boy Scouts, how were you treated?
What's that?
How were you treated in the Boy Scouts?
From the time I was there, I was treated well because we had quite a few Jewish fellows there in the troop.
We talked about the day of the Anschluss and the immediate period following the Anschluss.
Right.
What went on after that?
Well, after this, we were, how should I say, a second-rate. The Jews were second-rate, and you just had to watch your step in order not to get into any trouble. Otherwise, you would have been a problem. The thing changed at the Crystal Night, Kristallnacht. That was the November 1938, I think the November 18th, 1938, when they arrested my father and took him downstairs into the streets, and there was socialist slogans printed on the cement. And the Jews had to come with buckets and brushes and wash off all these things. And I went over to one of the leaders there, and I told him that my father's an invalid and I'd like to take his place. So they let him go, and I started washing and stuff like that. Then they took us to the police station, and we had to clean toilets and stuff like that. And they kept us there at night, and they let us go the next morning.
Other than what happened with you and your father, what else did you observe? Or what?
Well, my father had a pretty good fur business, and he had connections to different legations. And he had friends in the English legation. And which I didn't tell you before, after Hitler came, to give you a little background. My mother had a brother who was a consul general of Romania, and he had diplomatic immunity. And somewhere in the summer of '38, he came to Vienna. And my mother had a dress made, new dress made with buttons running from top to bottom. And every button was opened up, the wood was taken out, and $1,000 banknotes were rolled up and put into these buttons. And my uncle, the consul general, had diplomatic immunity, and he put money into his diplomatic pouch. And they took a night train to Zurich, Switzerland, and they deposited the money in a numbered account. And they came back, and they were successful.
What was your uncle's name?
My uncle's name was Leo Gans, and he lived in Timișoara in Romania. In the late '38, my father could not get out of Vienna because he was under the Polish quota, and the quota was filled up. In order to bring you back a little earlier, in April or May of '38, I'm making a delivery for my father on a bicycle in the outskirts of Vienna. And I come upon a street where there's a lot of people standing there. And I stopped my bike and asked one of the men, "What are you guys standing there for?" So they explained to me that this is the American consulate, and they want to pick up an application for a visa. When I was 17 years old, but I said to myself, it can't do me no harm to pick one up too. So I got in line, I picked up the application for a visa, and I mailed it to the American consulate in Vienna. In the summer of 1938, my father had a brother in New York, and my mother had a sister. My mother had a sister in New York. And we started corresponding and asked them to send us an affidavit. But my father could not go to the United States because the quota, the Polish quota, was filled. And my sister could have gone with me, but she was a young child, and my parents didn't want to let her go with me unsupervised. So decided they're going to keep in Vienna. In November of 38, after the Crystal Night, I got a notification to come to the American consulate and pick up a visa. I went for physical, I passed, and they gave me a visa to go to the United States. And my father procured me a ticket on the Holland America line, and in December I left Vienna on the train to go to Holland, Vlissingen, Holland, and I boarded one of the boats to go to the United States.
What was the ship's name, do you recall?
It was one of, I think, the Rotterdam or one of the other Holland America vessels. And I was by myself, and I arrived in New York Harbor on January 4th, 1939.
For a moment, back to Kristallnacht. Who participated in the activities of Kristallnacht?
All Gentiles, because for them it was a great pleasure to destroy the same way like you had in Watts, in Los Angeles, or any other place in this country.
When you say all Gentiles, does that mean Austrians as well as Germans?
There were no Germans, there were only Austrians. It was in Vienna. The Germans did their job in Germany at the same night.
What happened to your synagogue that night?
They burnt it down to the ground. They threw they took all the books, and they made a big, fire in the middle of the street, and they had a great time.
What were you thinking when you saw them?
I was thinking of revenge.
Did you see that fire personally?
Oh, absolutely. I was thinking of revenge, but when both hands are tied, there isn't too much you can do. But my chance came later.
We'll talk about that.
Absolutely.
What else did you see that night? I'm interested in a lot
They
of
broke
detail.
every Jewish store's windows. They went in, they robbed, they plundered, destroyed. Whatever they wanted to do, there was open season.
Did you personally witness any people being hit?
Sure, you've seen them. Absolutely. I mean, you could see it from the windows upstairs. We had this fourth floor. We had an apartment, I told you, which looked out to the main street, and there was plenty going on. And most Jews tried to stay inside.
Were any people taken away that night?
I'm sure there was plenty.
Was there anyone that you knew who?
Not personally, because we didn't have too big of a family. See, my father didn't have any brothers or sisters in Vienna, and my mother didn't have any brothers or sisters either. They lived in different parts of Europe.
We're going to stop for a moment now to change the tape.
Right.
The survivor is Henry Wieselberg, Wieselberg. This is tape 2. You mentioned previously about having arrived in New York, but I would like to go back for a moment and ask you to describe the last night in your home prior to your leaving for Holland.
All right. That last night at home was very emotional because I knew, and my parents and sister knew, that we might never meet again. Because that time, as far as Austria was going, America was an unknown place. Movies or other editorials that were not as prevalent as we have today. We didn't have that time satellites which used to program or show you different countries. So it was something like you're going into the unknown as far as I was concerned. The next morning, my parents took me to the railroad station in Vienna. And I still remember it vividly that my father and I, we cried bitterly. because I never knew whether we were going to see each other again. I must say right now I had very loving parents, wonderful parents, and I'm sure I'm going to miss them a lot. So, after we said the last goodbye, the train went north and crossed into Czechoslovakia first, and then went into Belgium, and I arrived in Vlissingen the next day.
How was it that you were permitted to travel on the train?
Because I had a visa. I had an Austrian passport, and I had an American visa, which was legal, and the only thing we were allowed to take along is the clothes on your back and $10.
Was your Austrian passport marked with your religion?
Absolutely. It was a big J on the first page, which means Jude. And I didn't have any problems. Once I got out over the border, people rejoiced in the train once we left Austria and Germany. And in Holland, I think I spent one night in a hotel and then boarded the Rotterdam, and we set sail for the United States.
You mentioned the parting at the train station with your father. Where was your mother at that time?
Right outside of the car, the railroad car. She was waiting outside. I kissed her first, and my father came up in the little vestibule when you get up the steps, and we kissed again, and we both cried.
And your sister?
My sister waited downstairs with my mother.
Who were the other passengers on the train?
Well, Jewish people, maybe some Gentiles. I mean, I didn't make any friends, I tell you the truth. And it was very emotional.
Were there any incidents on the train?
No. They checked us. They checked the passport on each border. We went to a few countries, and there was no problems.
Were there any incidents in Holland that you can remember?
No, none.
How was the crossing on the ship?
Talking?
Now the crossing. I mean, how was the voyage?
The voyage was uneventful. I mean, I was very susceptible to seasickness, and I spent most of my time up on deck because it helped with the seasickness.
Now, when did your aunt and your uncle arrive in America? You said that your father, I believe, had a brother,
Yes.
And your mother had a sister. When did they emigrate?
My father's brother came to United States in 1924.
And your mother's sister?
Because the Polish army was after him, and he tried to escape, and he changed his name and came to the United States. My mother's sister met an American in Czechoslovakia, and he married her, and that's how she came to the United States in around 1927-28.
Your father's brother who changed his name, what did he change it to?
He took his mother's name. His original name was Wieselberg, and then when he left Austria, he changed his name to Dahlberg, which was his mother's maiden name.
What was your mother's sister's married name when she came to America?
Gans. Or married name was Staus, Stauss, and her husband came originally from Germany and also emigrated to the United States.
Could you now describe your arrival in America?
Yes. We got in Hoboken. We landed in Hoboken at one of the piers, and my uncle, my father's brother, and my mother's brother-in-law, and my mother's sister, they met me at the pier, and they took me to New York. That time we took the ferry, went to New York, and somehow or other my aunt my mother's sister, they didn't have enough room in the apartment, so they rented a furnished room for me, which I thought was very unfair, because being the first day in a foreign country, they put me into a furnished room. But my father had a lot of foresight, and my sister and I, we took English lessons for the last couple of years in Vienna, and I was pretty well versed with the language. I might not have been fluent, but people could understand me and I could understand them. And that's how I managed to survive.
What happened then? Did you...
After a week or two, like I said, my father's brother was a furrier, which my father taught him in Vienna. And my mother's sister's husband, my uncle, he had a butcher shop in Washington Heights. And after a couple of weeks, I had to decide if I want to be a butcher or want to be a furrier. But being that I went to furrier school in Vienna in 1936, 37, I decided to become a furrier too. And my uncle promised me that he'll do the same for me what my father did for him in Vienna. And I started out in the fur business in, it would have been about February of 39, and I became a floor boy. That means run errands, clean up, stuff like that. And I started working for my uncle. And over the years, I became a full-fledged mink and sable cutter, and I supported myself.
Outside of work, what was your life like in 1939, 1940?
Well, you joined a German or Austrian club in New York, like New World Club and places like this. And that's where you met people which emigrated also from Germany and Austria. And you formed certain friendships, and you started a social life. And America was wonderful at that time. It's wonderful today too, but not to such an extent. And it was the freedom and all the things you could have. It was something like out of a fairy tale. There was no shortage of food, there was no shortage of entertainment, there was no shortage of vacations, there was no shortage of automobiles, there was no shortage at all. And it made a great impression on me, and I became an American loving this country and appreciating it to this very day.
What were some of the things you were doing outside of work?
I was an avid bicycle rider in Europe. And they sent me my bicycle from Europe to the United States, which I got. And I went on bicycle trips, and I went on picnics, and I went camping, and all the outdoor facilities, which I enjoyed. And I joined the Boy Scouts of America also.
Well, how old were you at this time?
18.
And the Boy Scouts still accepted you at that age?
Oh, sure.
Did you ever become a leader in the Boy Scouts?
I wasn't a leader, but I was a first class scout. And I did volunteer work with certain committees, I remember. I met some wonderful people, and I had a very comfortable time.
Did you encounter any kind of anti-Semitism?
Not in the Scouts, because quite a few kids were Jewish.
How about outside? How about...
There was no anti-Semitism that time in this country. Not on the outside and not in New York. Maybe Midwest or in the South, but not in New York. Because New York had a big Jewish population.
Were you able to practice your religion?
Yes,
yeah.
Without a doubt.
Anything else happen in 1939, 40, 41 that you recall?
Well, in 1940, my parents arrived from London with my sister, and we took an apartment at 404 Audubon Avenue. And my father was fairly sick man. He had heart condition. And he did not go back to work. And I supported my parents with whatever means I had. At that time already I was making fairly good money. And my sister started also working. I don't remember what she did, but we were a very happy family. And we had a nice family life.
When did you become aware of the war? When did you first hear about that the war might happen, or the beginning of the war?
Well, in 1st of September of 1939, the war broke out in Europe. Hitler annexed Sudetenland, Czechoslovakia, and Poland. So there was a war going on in Europe, and it did not affect the American continent. And life went on as usual. When we had Pearl Harbor, there was a different story.
Was that when you became
Aware
full awareness?
That America is being threatened.
Before Pearl Harbor, or any time after, were you aware of any pro-German activities in New York?
Well, they had bunds here. There was places here. To just give you a little example. Being an avid skier, in the February of 1940, I was told that Lake Placid is a very nice ski area, and unknowingly to me, I didn't know any place where to stop. So I'm going to give you a detailed description of what happened. I took the night train from Grand Central Station to Lake Placid. And we arrived there at 7 o'clock in the morning. It happened to be a Christmas day. There was snow on the ground. It was very picturesque. I got off the train. I had a rucksack, a pair of skis, and a pair of poles. And I walked up the main street of Lake Placid, and there was a church there, and the pastor was standing outside. We greeted each other with Merry Christmas and a good morning. And he asked me what I'm doing here. He says, I told him I want to spend 2 weeks skiing. I said to him, I haven't got a place where to stay. So he recommended the Mirror Lake Inn on the lake. I walked up there, I rang the bell, and the pastor had told me they have dormitories in the basement for single people. I asked him to show me one. He showed it to me, and I signed in, and I took it. After being there for a couple of days, I was looking through the literature of the hotel, and they had said in big letters, restricted clientele. Unfortunately, I didn't know what that meant. But as long as they didn't bother me, I wouldn't bother them. I spent 2 lovely weeks up there. I happened to be sitting on the table of Tommy Harmon, the football player, who took me every day up to the slopes with his car because he didn't have transportation and brought me back. It was a very pleasant stay, and later on I learned what restricted clientele was. And there was quite a few places in Lake Placid where Jews could not go in, including the Lake Placid Club and some other hotels. And I came back, and everything was all right. You want me to go further with Miami or not yet?
Well, I guess I wanted to just ask you about whether you witnessed any pro-German demonstrations in New York.
The Bund used to hold rallies, and in Yorkville, which was a German area, they had a few of these demonstrations and stuff like that. Then you had Father Coughlin here in the 30s, which was an anti-Semite from the White Goat. And being that it was a free country, he had a radio program every Sunday, and a few other guys like that.
Now, where were you on the day you heard about Pearl Harbor?
Pearl Harbor, I was in New York, and everybody was aghast. And that was the first time that America was threatened by a foreign nation. And I think that's the time when they started stopping making civilian supplies and started to go to war materials, because we lost half of our fleet. Ships were being built, planes were being built, guns were being made, ammunition was being manufactured.
What transpired in your life after that, during that time?
In 1940, in January of 43, I got a notice from Uncle Sam congratulating me of being drafted. I went to Grand Central Palace for a physical. I passed it without any problems. And on March 5th, 1943, I was inducted into the Army, and I went to Fort Dix. In Fort Dix, I was interrogated as far as my qualifications goes. And what I forgot to tell you is, after Pearl Harbor, I used to be a first aid instructor, and I joined an ambulance group where we supplied ambulance attendants instead of the doctors for first aid. Because interns were sent up to the front, and we were all first aid instructors, and we used to ride the ambulance from Monday to Friday from 7 at night to 7 in the morning once a week. And we used to give first aid to people who were hurt, injured, and take them to the hospital. So when I got to Fort Dix on the 5th of March, I gave them my choices of being put in certain categories. I was a ski instructor at that time, and I was an ambulance attendant. And there was no answer to where they would send me. In the meantime, they sent me from Fort Dix. I went to Fort McClellan, Alabama, which was an advanced infantry training center.
Where did you have your basic infantry?
Right there, Fort McClellan.
Okay.
Fort McClellan, Alabama. And we had basic training, and then we had advanced training. And then I was sent to Pennsylvania into a replacement center and went to Newport News, Virginia, and shipped out with the troop ship. We did not know where we were going. The only thing I remember is vividly, we went through the Straits of Gibraltar. And this told me, being a new geography, this told me this was the Mediterranean. And in the end of March, we arrived in North Africa in Oran, which was French territory. And we went to a camp there, and after a couple of weeks, my name came up to ship out, and I shipped out to Italy. And I wound up on Anzio beachhead, which was taken 1 or 2 days before the invasion.
Back to basic training for a moment in Fort McClellan. Were there any incidents of anti-Semitism?
Yes, because they made derogatory remarks. The cadres were all Southerners, and they used to make derogatory remarks. But listen, you couldn't fight them because they had more, authority than I had, so you let it go by. The only thing I can say is the minute we got into combat, there was the end of anti-Semitism. Because these Goyams, they knew exactly that their bullet can hit them and kill them just as well as the Jews. And from the day I got into combat, there was no more anti-Semitism.
In basic training, were you assigned to a particular company?
Oh, sure.
And do you remember the name?
It was Company D of a certain battalion. I still have the pictures from it, but I don't remember.
When you went to North Africa, were you assigned to a unit?
Yes.
Do you remember?
I got into 45th Division, into A Company, 179th Infantry. And I became an aide to the company commander, who was a Gentile from Jefferson City, Missouri.
Remember his name?
Yes, Carl D. DeBrock.
What was his rank?
His rank was a captain, and I was his aide.
What was your rank at the time?
That time I was a private. But being I spoke the German language, and we were fighting Germans, he needed me. And he became my best friend, even though there's a difference in rank. He was a wonderful man. And I corresponded with him until the 1985. Then I have to tell you a story what happened to him on a later date.
We left it where you received orders and you shipped out to Anzio, and you landed in Anzio beach a day or two after the invasion. What was describe the scene at that time?
It was chaos for the simple reason, to give you a little background on that. The invasion was simple. The Germans didn't expect us to be up that far north, because there was an invasion in Salerno a couple of months before, and they figured we might make an invasion near Monte Cassino. But the mistake that the generals made, we only went in with 2 divisions, and the first day we advanced 10 miles. But then when we looked back, there was nobody coming back, nobody backing us. They didn't bring in other reinforcements. Then the Germans got wise that we invaded, and they counterattacked, and they nearly pushed us into the sea. Because the 10 miles which we took, we had to give up, and we were all the way down by the harbor and fighting for our lives.
Describe the casualties.
What's that?
Describe the casualties that you recall.
The casualties was high because we didn't have no setups here for first aid stations. We didn't have no hospitals there. It was a haphazard operation. And the only thing is the sheer will of the American soldiers of these 2 divisions. With all the casualties, we tried to hold the port.
You mentioned you were in the 45th Division.
Yes.
Which was the other division? Do you remember?
The other one was the 3rd Division.
Do you remember the name of the division commanders?
No. My commission that I had from the 45th was General Eagles.
General?
Eagles. E-A-G-L-E-S. Eagles. He was the division commander.
Was the division part of a larger organization?
Sure.
Which
It was part, I think, of the 7th Army.
And who was the commander of the 7th?
Patch. General Patch. He was the army commander of this. And then reinforcements came in. But we were so pinned down on that Anzio beachhead that you couldn't even relieve yourself outside. So you had to relieve yourself in a foxhole and throw the stuff outside. And we stood there for 5 months. We laid there for 5 months just trying to hold the beachhead. And in June of 1943, we started getting heavy artillery replacements. And we started, in the middle of June, we started counterattacking. And the end of June, I don't remember the date, or the first week of July, we liberated Rome.
What kind of a weapon did you carry?
I carried a carbine, and I carried a pistol also. 45.
How was the liberation of Rome?
They were very joyous, I must tell you. They treated us like kings. There was very little food there, but the spirit was there.
Please tell me again if you remember the date that you arrived at Anzio, approximately.
The invasion was on the 22nd of January, and I got there about the 24th, a couple of days later.
Of what year?
1943.
Tell me again when you were inducted.
Oh, no, it was 1944, excuse me. 1944, because I was inducted in 43. This was January 22nd, 1944.
That you arrived in Anzio?
In Anzio.
And you were in Rome?
Was in Rome in June.
How long were you there?
We were there a week, and then they pulled us back to Naples for rest and recreation and more amphibious training.
We're going to stop for a moment now to change the tape. The survivor is Henry Wieselberg, Wieselberg, and this is tape 3. I want to backtrack for a moment. During the combat period, moving out from Anzio and moving back, etc., did you lose any close friends?
Did we lose any?
Did you personally lose any buddies, any close friends?
Oh, sure. The thing is about infantry, your chances of survival are from poor to nil. And there was always casualties, but being that we had a big amount of replacements, they always could count on more people filling their spaces. So, after we took Rome, we stood in Rome about a week, and that's the first time we used to get hot food, because in combat there isn't such a thing as a kitchen. And we got hot food, and we used to get showers, which we didn't have on Anzio. Or if you did have it, once every 2 months you used to take a shower, or you wash yourself out of a helmet or in a stream. And they took us down to Naples for a week of rest and recreation, and then we started amphibious training. And there was another invasion on the horizon, but nobody knew where or when. So, at the beginning of August, we boarded LCIs, landing craft infantry, and we started steaming. And I remember we passed Sardinia and Corsica. And the way it looked to us, we were going somewhere north. And on August 15th, 1944, we made the invasion of southern France and opened up the second front in order to relieve the pressure up in the Bulge in northern France. And the invasion was fairly easy because nobody expected us.
Where did you land?
I landed in Saint-Tropez, but there was no showgirls on the beach, and it was desolate. And within a couple of days, we ran in 50, 60 miles inland, and the first counterattacks we found was in the city of Grenoble. And from there on, we had counterattacks every day, because the Germans were fighting a retreating action, and we had always casualties and whatever came with it.
Where were you when you heard about the Normandy invasion?
The Normandy invasion was in June, and in June we were still in Anzio and Rome.
How did your
We were very joyous because we figured that this is going to help us quite a bit, because Hitler is going to put a lot of troops up north and take them away from us, which it did help us.
so now you were in Grenoble?
Now we were in Grenoble. From Grenoble we went further north to Nancy, and then we crossed the Siegfried Line, and there's a town in Germany called Aschaffenburg, which was one of the heaviest battles of the whole World War II. We lost a lot of men there, and it was a disaster because there the Germans put up fierce resistance and they tried to push us out of Germany. But we held our ground and we made it.
Were you ever wounded?
I was wounded twice. I was hit by shrapnel. Went to the aid station, they patched you up and you went back on the line.
Were you ever involved up to this point in taking any prisoners?
Yes. My job was, if a prisoner came in, which was caught in the woods or on the roads or in a house, I interrogated him because I spoke the language. I related to CIA counterintelligence, and from there we arrested him, and he got put into a prisoner of war camp.
How did the Americans treat the German prisoners?
Too good. Way too good. But unfortunately, we are too civilized in this respect, and we have, how should I say, pity. And when it comes to these things, you cannot have pity. You deal an eye with an eye and a tooth with a tooth.
Did any of the fellow GIs feel that they need to get retribution?
You see, unfortunately, I was with an Oklahoma National Guard outfit. There were a lot of Indians there, and they didn't know what they were fighting for. In order for you to know what you're fighting, you had to be Jewish. Because the Gentiles didn't know what they're fighting. They told them to fight, so they fought. But if there would have been more Jews there, I think we would have done a better job on the Germans. I rather was shooting a German than eat breakfast in the morning.
What went on then?
Well, after we won the Battle of Aschaffenburg, we took the town of Bamberg. Then we took the town of Nuremberg. And then on April 29th, we came upon Dachau, which we didn't know that this was actually a concentration camp.
Now, did you know that there were concentration camps?
Yes.
How did you know that?
It was rumors and it was word of mouth.
Okay.
But we didn't know the locations and we didn't know where they were.
Please go on.
So when we stumbled upon Dachau and we seen the corpses on the main street, we opened up fire with machine guns and killed as many guards as there were left. Most of them had deserted already. And then, being that I spoke the language, I started talking to the prisoners. And they told us what happened and where it happened and how it happened. And I do have pictures, which you're going to see later, where all the shot ones we put into buildings, German guards, as many as we could get. And you couldn't get near the refugees there because there was sickness there. There was typhus, typhoid, malaria, and all these things.
How did you know there was a sickness there?
Because you could see right by their faces and their condition when they weighed 60, 70 pounds. I knew they were not in good health. And when you seen the emaciated bodies laying there, you knew damn well that they starved to death.
How did you feel as a Jew?
Anger, that's the only thing I can say. Rage.
Did you personally shoot guards?
I shot I'm sure I hit, but to tell you that there was no time to take aim. This was all done randomly.
Did non-Jewish Americans shoot guards?
Did the same thing, absolutely.
The Indians too?
The Indians were part of our outfit. Look, we knew that a German in uniform is our enemy, so it's either kill or be killed. But we couldn't spend time there because we were on a roll, so to speak. And our next objective was Munich.
If it's okay with you, I would like to spend a little time there, as to the extent that you may recall,
Sure.
even though you didn't spend much time there. Do you recall what it meant to you, personally, to be a Jew and now to be in a position of power?
Absolutely. I want to do right what was done wrong.
What was it like for you to see the camps?
Utter rage and, how should I say, a terrible disappointment of humanity. And that people, the Germans had guards there. When they went for the Nuremberg trial, everybody said, I was told to do that. So they did these things because they were told or they wanted to do it. To this day, I still don't know. I'm sure it's the other way around, that they wanted to do this because there are certain people which get pleasure out of other people being dying or sick or helpless.
Were any officers present?
Sure.
What was their reaction?
Well, they did the same thing as we did. They gave orders to take the camp. And we did.
You mentioned what your reaction was, one of rage and anger. What was the reaction of the other GIs?
Well, you see, I don't know exactly what they felt for the simple reason you don't know what the other person thinks. I mean, we had to do a job, and we did the job. Every person had a different opinion of this. Maybe some it didn't bother, and maybe some it bothered a lot. Especially we were only 2 or 3 Jews in a company. So we were way in the minority. And I know exactly how I felt. I would have been happy to kill all of them.
Did any of the Jewish prisoners approach you?
Oh, sure, they couldn't. They were all in barbed wires. Everybody was under barbed wires, and the only ones we saw outside were the dead ones. There was nobody walking around.
Did anybody?
Oh, sure, they
get
approached
through?
me. They tried. They started giving me names and addresses of their relatives, but I couldn't handle it because it was overwhelming.
Were there any Jews there from Austria?
I don't even know. I tell you the truth. They all wore prisoner uniforms.
Describe the uniform.
They were with stripes, ragged pants, no shoes, no clothes. And we gave them as many cigarettes as we had, or as many candies as we had, or rations, whatever we had. We threw over the barbed wire fences for them.
Were there both men and women there? Or
Mostly men. Women might have been in a different section.
any children?
I didn't see any.
Did you see? You mentioned that you did see, in fact, dead Jewish prisoners.
They all were Jewish prisoners. Most of them, 90% were Jewish prisoners. There might have been there some political prisoners, and there might have been there some political Gentiles.
How many dead bodies did you witness? Were there like a few, or were there many?
In hundreds and hundreds of bodies. And there were big piles of clothes on the site. And the ovens were still going. And there was, charred skeletons were in there.
Did you see the ovens?
I seen that. I seen the gas chambers. I seen everything.
Did you look inside the ovens?
Yes, I did. They used Slovakian or Polish slave labor to burn these victims. which was forced labor.
Did you speak to any of the surrounding German people about?
No, there was no Germans around that camp.
Did you have any conversations, any individual conversations with any of the inmates?
The inmates, yes, absolutely.
What did you talk about?
General things, how long have you been here, where you're from, and stuff like that. But I couldn't help him even if I tried to, because I was overwhelmed and overpowered with so many people as prisoners. After a couple of days, I think the Red Cross came in.
Did you see that?
No, I didn't see it. I was told. Mm-hmm. And they started separating the ones which were sick, the ones which were malnourished, and trying to give first aid.
When was that? You mentioned that all the prisoners were behind a barbed wire.
Yeah, a stockade.
Stockade. Yeah. Was that barbed wire ever broken? Did anybody break through? Or
we didn't break it because on account that they would have run around and you couldn't control it, because this had to be done in the proper manner. So what's happening is, and another thing is, we didn't spend that much time there. We took that camp in the morning, and in the afternoon of the same day of April 29th, 1945, we liberated Munich. The same night we marched into Munich.
Back to the Dachau experience, and you were there only, a matter of hours then?
A matter of hours, but I went back again a couple of times after we took Munich. That's where I took the pictures, the second time.
Did the commanding general ever make an appearance at Dachau?
I don't know if Eisenhower was there, but the commanding general was there.
Which one was that again?
At that time it was Major General, for the moment I can't think of it.
I'm sure it'll come to you.
A young fella. There was a Major General. He was the commanding officer of the 45th Division.
Did you see him actually at the camp?
No. He wasn't there. Because when the infantry goes in, the general is not with them. Only in movies, but not in real life.
What was the highest ranking officer who was there with the infantry?
It must have been a full colonel.
Was this captain with you, the captain that you had befriended?
No. I forgot to tell you. In September of 1944, we were in France, and him and I, we were going on a reconnaissance patrol into the woods, Captain de Braak and myself. We wanted to make contact with the enemy. And we're walking through a small pass in the woods, and all of a sudden Captain de Braak steps on an S-mine, which is a bouncing Betty. It goes up that high and explodes with shrapnel. And he's mortally wounded. So I pull him back the same way we came, because I know this was clear. I radioed for a jeep, and they picked him up and took him to the first aid station. And he had a few terrible head wounds. They took him to Naples by air and operated on him in the general hospital. Then sent him to the States, and he had a second operation in Jefferson City, Missouri. And the poor guy never left the hospital for all the days he lived. He was mentally imbalanced, and he had permanent damage. I put a steel plate in. And I wrote to him for all the years that he was alive. And I was in touch with the family in Missouri. And I sent his clothes and his belongings to his mother. He was a single guy that time. And he was a prince of a guy.
How long did he live in that condition?
He lived in it till the early 80s.
And you said never left the hospital?
Never left the hospital. I had some other friends of mine going west, and they visited him for me. and they gave me the same report. They visit him in the hospital. He'll start out talking all right, and after 5 minutes he wanders off. He was pretty well damaged.
So you went on, and that same day after Dachau, you delivered Munich.
And we took the headquarters, the Air Force headquarters on Prinzregentenstraße. It was an Air Force headquarters there. We took it as our CP.
What is CP?
There was
Command post on that?
yeah, command post. It was a battalion command post. And what we did later on is, I went back twice more in the next couple of days to take these pictures.
Did you go on your own, or
On
were
my
you
own.
given instructions?
On my own. Being that the war was over, you could do more or less whatever you wanted. I had my own car there in Munich, which I requisitioned
Who did you requisition from?
a basement of an apartment house. It was a Lincoln, an American Lincoln Zephyr. I have pictures of that too. I don't know where they are. And I went to Munich and I took the pictures. I mean to Dachau and I took the pictures again.
Were there any unusual smells that you recall?
Yes, the smell of burning flesh permeated the air because it hung over there, all over the area. And the stench of rotting flesh also.
Did you, after the war, did you think about those scenes once in a while?
Well, let me tell you something. Being that we were in a combat outfit, in 1945, when we got discharged, a few fellows in New York, we formed the Eastern chapter of the 45th Infantry Division. The original chapter was in Oklahoma City, being that it was an Oklahoma National Guard outfit. So the main chapter was in Oklahoma, and we formed an Eastern chapter. And most of the guys which were with us in combat, we formed a group. We became an independent. And we used to meet once a month for about 40 years. And today we're still in touch with each other, whoever's left. And I'm the one who makes 2 dinners a year, one in spring and one in fall in a restaurant where we meet. And we're still getting together.
What did you guys talk about after the war?
Talked about the war. We talked about personal things, general information, main general conversation. Then we used to make reunions. We used to get speakers in, former officers of the 45th Division.
When you went back to take the pictures on your own, did you have any interaction with any of the inmates?
Nobody. I just talked to a few of them, but my main purpose was to document this thing. And you have these pictures.
When you went back for the pictures, had the Red Cross already arrived with help?
Very few people were there. Very few. Nobody bothered me getting in. First of all, I was in an American uniform. And number 2, nobody stopped me.
After the war, did you ever have any dreams or nightmares about what you saw?
I tell you something, I'm a pretty strong-willed person. And when I went through all these things, you get to be a little bit, how should I say, it runs off like the water on a duck's back, because you see so many dead, you see so many maimed. It's the same thing like a doctor which does surgery. I'm sure the sight of blood doesn't bother him. And that's the way it was with me.
How about some of the other guys?
Some other guys had a lot of problems. We had plenty of people that during combat, in the war years, they got shell-shocked. They had to be taken off the line. They had to be sent to rear ends, to quartermasters or linen departments or cooking or storage or something like this. Certain people could take combat, certain people could not.
If I were to ask you, if you were to say, what was your single most vivid recollection of the camp? What would you say was most vivid at that
The
time?
piles of body, the emaciated prisoners, they didn't have food, they didn't have shelter, they didn't have clothes, they had nothing. And then it was always, you never knew what tomorrow gonna bring. You never knew if you go right or you go left. One was living and working and one was gas chambers.
Do you know any incidents of the prisoners, of the inmates, taking any retribution on the German guards?
They did. I didn't see it personally, but I was told that they picked up shovels, and whoever of the German guards was alive, they killed them. Shovels or pickaxes or whatever there was.
Do you know if there were any guards other than Germans there, like Ukrainians or?
I don't know the nationality of the guards. I'm sure there was.
Where were you when the war ended?
Munich. We took Munich April 29th, and May 7th the war was over.
And you were still in Munich at the time?
Still in Munich, but then they shifted me to a town named Schrobenhausen, and from there they shifted me to the town of Wieselberg, and then the final stop was Mittenwald, which was in Bavaria, that's skiing country, and I went home from there. See, I had a lot of points. Being here in combat for quite some time, you have a lot of points, and I was sent home in September of 45.
What was your rank at the time?
PFC. They offered me a battlefield commission, which I didn't want to take, for the simple reason I rather would be with my family than stay over there for another 2 or 3 years.
When you got home, do you remember the troop ship that brought you home? The name?
No.
In what camp were you?
I landed in Newport News, Virginia.
And where were you discharged?
What's that?
When were you discharged?
And I was discharged at, I think, September 30th, 1945 in Newport News, Virginia. The first thing I did is I called my father, who was a sick man in a bad heart condition, and he only lived his life to see me come back. And when he heard my voice that I told him I was on the United States territory, he went to shul and thanked God. After the war, I became very active. I was the president of this 45th Infantry Division Association. And we made numerous trips to Oklahoma for national reunions. The last national reunion I attended was in August of 1990. We had 12 guys with their wives went to Oklahoma for a reunion, which we had a marvelous time. And seen all the other guys, whoever went there, which we were in combat with.
Before we go on and talk a little bit about your post-war life, I asked you a lot of questions about your time that you spent in Dachau. Is there anything that I may have left out of any recollections?
No, you didn't. Like I told you, we spent there a few hours, and we liberated the camp, eliminated the resistance, and moved on, because it was a front which had to move in order to take Munich, which was our main objective. This happened to be a side objective, which we stumbled on.
You were the first guys on the scene in Dachau?
I might not be the first guy.
No, not you individual, but your unit?
Yes, the outfit was. It's documented at the 45th Liberty. But you know what it is? There's copycats. There was 42nd Division within 25 miles, and everybody's trying to take credit for it. Everybody was there. It's like everything else. There was another outfit which said they took it, but the fact of the matter is, history books mention us as the primary liberator of Dachau.
We're going to stop for a moment and change the tape.
Good.
The survivor is Henry Wieselberg, W-I-E-S-E-L-B-E-R-G, and this is tape 4. We talked about, just before, about when you were discharged. Well, actually, we talked about how your father was happy to hear from you.
Yes.
We did talk about your discharge, did we? At the Newport News.
Got discharged in Newport News.
What date was that again?
That was, I think, September 30th, 1945. Took the train to New York. Got into Grand Central Station. I had my duffel bag on my shoulder. And when I went into that subway in New York, I remember very well from 42nd Street, I go up to Washington Heights. That time we lived already 102nd Street and Broadway, 240 West 102nd. And I came in the subway and everybody shook my hand and they were happy to see me because they could see I just came back from the army. And it was a very emotional, I remember it like it was yesterday, very emotional meeting again with my family. I went into my apartment where we lived and my mother was home alone. And we hugged and kissed. So I asked her, where's my father? And she told me he's sitting on Broadway on the bench reading a paper. I went down there. I was in good shape that time, I must say so. I was tanned and I was strong. I went ahead, I picked the man up like he was a feather. And I hugged him and I kissed him. And he had a little workshop in the apartment where he used to do fur remodeling and repairs. I took that key from that shop and I told him, as of today, you never go into that workshop again. And I retired him on the spot.
Did you take over the shop?
No. I was a furrier, but I worked in New York. But I didn't want him to work anymore because he was sick and he had a shorter leg. And I wanted him to enjoy whatever time he had, but he was not lucky. He died February 23rd, 1947. But his biggest pleasure was to see me come back from this war.
You mentioned that you were wounded.
Yes.
Have you ever received any compensation,
No,
any pension?
because I never registered for it and I never was documented for it. Because all they do is they patch you up and you go back.
When did you become an American citizen?
I became American citizen in Africa. When I was in North Africa, a gentleman from the State Department came. There was an announcement on the bulletin board that anybody who jumped ship or is illegal in the army assemble in the mess hall at 12 o'clock. There was about 40, 50 people there. Raise your right hand and repeat after me. I hereby declare that I'm an American citizen, and that's where I became a citizen. Because you couldn't go into combat without being a citizen. Because originally I signed a document in Austria when I left, never to fight the fatherland. So I couldn't go into combat until I was made a citizen.
What did you do after the war? Tell me
Like I told you, I worked already for my uncle as a furrier. 2 weeks later, after I came back from the army, I went back to work. And I worked ever since, till today.
Tell me a little bit about your personal life after the war.
Well, after the war, the times were good. I had money in my pocket. I never was on the 5250 club, never once. I made good money.
What's the 5250 club?
When you came out of the army, for 52 weeks, they gave you you gave you $50 a month until you found yourself a job. It's like welfare in a nice way, which they were entitled to because some people came back, didn't have a trade or anything. For 1 year, they gave you $50 a month.
And you say you did not...
Never collect a dime because I made a good living that time already.
What went on in your personal life?
My personal life is I started going out with girls. And then in 1947, I met my wife, who was also from Vienna.
What's her name?
And the mothers the father was dead already, but their mothers knew each other, so my mother introduced me to her. And on September 5th, 1948, we got married. And I took a brand new apartment in Rego Park on 62nd Avenue. And in 1949, we had our first child.
Tell me about how many children you have and what are their names.
I have 5 children. And the oldest one is Ronald. The second one is Robert. The third one is Richard. Then it came 2 girls, Sharon and Amy.
Where are the children living now?
The children all spread apart. My son Ronald owns a 7-bay gas station in New Hyde Park, Long Island. My son Robert is a school teacher in Orlando. My son Richard is moving in June also to Orlando, and he right now is a manager of a rock bottom store, which is a health and beauty aid. My daughter Sharon has 3 children and lives in Pennsylvania. And my daughter Amy lives in Valley Stream. She's got a master's in business administration and is the dean of admission of the Hofstra Law School and goes for her PhD in Columbia University.
Over these years, have you thought much about the war?
Every time you have a meeting with the 45th Division guys, that's the only topic because that's what interests us and that's what we talked about.
Have you ever talked to your children about it?
Not too much, because to bring up something like a concentration camp, I wouldn't consider this a pleasant conversation. They know I was in the Army. They know my friends who were with me in the Army. I'm moving now to Sunrise, where an Army buddy lives there of mine who brought me there. And we're still friends for 53 years and close friends.
After the war, did you talk to, other than your Army buddies, did you talk to anybody else about what you saw in the camps?
When the conversation used to come up, let's say at social meetings, we used to discuss it, yes. But my friends were luckier than I. I had my best friend who also came from Vienna. And we were in basic training together in Fort McClellan, Alabama. And when the war broke out, he went to Rome to talk on Free Europe radio. And his biggest damage to himself was when he slept in a pup tent, his feet were sticking out because he was 6 foot long and he got his feet sunburned. That was his biggest casualty of the war. From all the Jewish fellows that I knew, I mean, privately, in my circle, I was the only one who went into combat. Other people had the good fortune of being in the rear echelons or be in a different outfit or be, let's say, quartermasters or supplies or transportation or stuff like that.
Was your faith affected in any way based on what you witnessed?
The faith?
Your faith, yes.
Well, sure it is affected because there is no equality in life. You got to fight for it.
I asked you a few minutes ago about your children. Do you have any grandchildren?
I got 10 grandchildren.
You care to name them all?
Be my pleasure if I remember. There is Evan, Jason, Rachel. Then there is Ralph, Stephen, and Rebecca. That's 6. Then comes Sandy, Danny, and Natalie is 9. And then the last one is Jamie, 10.
What do you do for recreation nowadays?
Today, while I'm in Florida, I do as follows. In the morning, I walk 4 miles. Then I have breakfast, and I go to the gym, do 100 sit-ups on the rowing machine, and do 100 sit-ups on the board. Then I pull some weights. Then I go swimming. Then I have lunch. In the afternoon, I go on a bicycle ride. I use my bicycle every day. I go shopping with it and stuff like that. And in the evening, most of the time, I see a movie or a show, or I meet with people. Right now, in Florida, in New York, I do different things.
You mentioned much earlier that in your youth you were an avid skier.
Yes,
Have you continued with that?
absolutely. Just to prove to you, in 1997, last year, I was a whole week in Vermont skiing. This year, I didn't go yet. Because in Florida, it's tough to get snow.
Before we finish, is there anything else that I didn't ask you that you feel is
I
important?
must say you are very thorough, and I appreciate having you as my interrogator.
Interviewer.
Interrogator, whatever you want. And besides being a good interviewer, you happen to be a good friend too.
Thank you. What message would you like to convey to your children, grandchildren, and generations that follow?
The only thing I can say is the same thing what Israel says, never again. And may people watch, because it can happen, and history repeats itself. What we had in 1940s, you had the last 4 years in Yugoslavia, with the same concentration camp, with the same tortures. Maybe they didn't have gas chambers, but they had torture, they had killings. You have it in Africa today with Rwanda and with Zaire and with all the other places. I guess religion and politics is the biggest killer of humanity. With this note, I'm leaving you.
I want to thank you very much for
It was a pleasure.
time you gave us today.
I'm happy to give my time and effort to help the cause, and may it help somewhere, someplace, sometimes.
Thank you. Who is in this photo, please?
This picture was taken around 1936, 37, or 38. This is my dear parents, my sister, and myself.
Names of everyone?
This is my father, Elkan, my mother, Paula, my sister, Leanne, and myself, Henry Wieselberg.
And where was the picture taken?
This picture was taken at the photo studio in Vienna.
Thank you. Who was in this photo?
This picture was a birthday present to my father from Henry and Leanne. It was taken on the 10th of July, 1929, when I was 8 years old and my sister was 6.
Where was it
Also taken in Vienna.
Thank you. Okay. Please describe this photo.
Okay, this is a class picture of mine in elementary school. It happened to be on the 10th May of 1931. My teacher was Miss Stangelberger, who I loved dearly, and she made a very good impression on me for the rest of the elementary school.
Thank you. Please describe this portion of the picture.
This is the class in the elementary school in Vienna, Austria. The top left is my teacher, Miss Stangelberger, who was very good, and I'm the third person from the left in the middle row. I'm 10 years old.
Thank you. Who's in this photo, please?
Okay?
Yes.
Okay. This picture was taken in August 1987 when I went for a visit to Vienna, and this is my school teacher, Miss Stangelberger, which I visited in her home in Vienna.
Thank you. Okay. Who's in this photo?
This is a picture of myself, Henry Wieselberg, taken on a west area in France, in one of the towns in France in 1944.
Thank you.
Because the phone is off the...
Who's in this photo, please?
This is me, Henry Wieselberg, taken in southern France, being decorated with 2 medals. One was the Bronze Star First Oak Cliff Cluster, and second is the Combat Infantryman's Badge by Colonel Preston, who was my regimental commander.
What year?
1944.
Thank you. Who's in this photo?
This is a picture of myself taken in the early 50s on a skiing trip to Pennsylvania after I came out of the Army.
That's good. Thank you. What's this photo?
This photo I took on April 30th, 1945 at the Dachau concentration camp in Munich.
Thank you. What's this picture? This picture here.
This is the picture which I took on April 30th, 1945, which are the clothes of prisoners outside the gas chamber.
Thank you. Where? In what
In
city?
Dachau concentration camp in Germany.
Oh, in other words, what's that camera?
This is a dead dog here.
Okay. Dog kennel.
Okay, this picture I took April 30th, 1945. These are the doors of the gas chambers of the Dachau concentration camp near Munich.
What does the sign say under
The
this?
sign says there, careful, don't enter, loss of life, possible, do not enter, danger of death.
Thank you. Describe this photo, please.
This picture I took on April 30th, 1945. This happens to be a dead dog which we shot, which was sicked on prisoners if they tried to escape or other unruly things in the Dachau concentration camp in Germany.
What is behind the door?
Behind there are the cages where they kept the dogs.
Thank you.
This picture I took on April 30th, 1945 at the Dachau concentration camp near Munich, and it shows the German guards which we shot and killed them.